This video is sponsored by Bob. Because without absolutely cuddling and tickling the heck out of him, the combat system wouldn't be nearly as advanced as it is now. We've got a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. Here's the current state of the combat system in VELKYN, and trust me, there are so many systems at play here. Bob, you'll have to wait a moment. Our creepy floating friend is making the entrance, and we are going to check out how enemy detection works. Basically, enemies in VELKYN have eyes and ears. If the player moves within the enemy's line of sight, but at a distance, the enemy starts noticing the character gradually. If the player hangs around for too long, the enemy might begin to pursue and then attack, depending on its behavior settings. But more on that later. The player can tell the enemy's detection status by checking the color of the question mark icon over time. If it turns yellow or red, it means you should hide or get away quickly if you don't want to aggro them. If the player is in the enemy's direct line of sight and quite close, the enemy becomes aggressive immediately. Vision detection is handled by a line of sight sensor. It doesn't just spit out a simple true or false, but provides an averaged value that indicates how well the sensor has been detecting the target over the recent frames. I use this value to avoid false detections, when the enemy might only see a hand or a strand of hair from the character. The enemy's field of vision mimics that of a natural eye. Not only is the field of view limited, but vertical detection is also pretty restricted. If the player isn't in the enemy's sight, but makes loud noises by moving fast, jumping or attacking, the enemy will notice and get aggroed quickly too. The last way to aggro an enemy so far is through a direct attack. In the future, I'm planning for enemy groups to have a basic shared intelligence and communicate their status with each other. So we can now trigger our enemies. What's the logical next step? Yep, pathfinding. And as you can see, implementing it was super easy and the results are already perfect. Just kidding, it works okay for now, but it definitely needs improvement. For pathfinding, I'm using a solution called A-Star Pathfinding by Aaron Gronberg. This allows me to generate nav meshes and paths super efficiently and almost in real time. Since VELKYN will have a lot of moving objects, real-time generation was a must-have for me. Another cool thing about this solution is that it lets us really smooth out those obviously artificial paths, making them look more natural. Right now, the setup is pretty simple, but I'm planning to integrate advanced features, like having enemies find cover when the player attacks from a distance. If an enemy gets close enough to the player, they go in for the attack. Melee enemies need to get closer before they can strike. Right now, each enemy only has one attack, which goes on cooldown for a few seconds after use. As a player, I can currently use a one-handed weapon. I can do simple attacks or pull off a combo. You can see the 2-hit combo of the starter weapon, basically a simple stick here. Other one-handed weapons will have 3-hit or maybe even 4-hit combos. Damage dealt shows up with damage numbers. Not every hit in a combo deals the same amount of damage. If the player times it right, they'll be rewarded for pulling off the full combo. If the player equips a one-handed weapon, they'll also be able to use a shield in the future. I haven't implemented this logic yet. When the player uses a two-handed weapon, they obviously can't use a shield, so blocking attacks won't be an option anymore. There's also a way to attack enemies from afar or hit distance switches, with the bow. Arrows lose height over distance and are also affected by the wind in the open world. You'll find different bows throughout the game that draw differently and result in different arrow trajectories. As you can see, the bow implementation is already perfect and doesn't need any further tweaking. Remember Bob? Well, he's gonna help us out by showcasing some mechanics that still need to be implemented. Incoming physical attacks and things like magical projectiles can be blocked with the shield. I don't want this mechanic to be abused, so there will be a system that limits the number of consecutive shield blocks. You can recharge your shield by landing successful attacks or by not blocking for a while. If you hit the parry button at just the right moment during an incoming attack, you can parry it. Depending on the enemy's type and size, this will stun them for a brief moment. As you progress in the game, you'll also get to use a parry attack combo to land a powerful strike right after a successful parry. Thanks for helping out, Bob. Like I mentioned in the previous devlog, you can also do dodge rolls. They cost stamina and give you a brief moment of invincibility, also known as iframes. Which type of damage avoidance the player chooses depends on a lot of factors, but mainly on personal preference and strategy. It's insane how many new games come out on Steam every year. It makes it so much harder to stand out against all the competing titles. I would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to add VELKYN to your wishlist. Increased wishlist additions boost the game's visibility during its launch. Your support would mean a lot to me. Thank you so much for your help. In my opinion, a good combat system needs a targeting or a lock-on system. But before we dive into the actual targeting, let me quickly explain the systems that are always running in the background. Let's assume the character is in a state where targeting is allowed. The targeting module regularly checks if there are targetable enemies within range. These are temporarily stored, and then it checks which of these enemies actually have a line of sight to both the camera and the character. Any enemies that haven't been filtered out at this point get an animated icon above their head. This icon signals to the player that the enemy is targetable. When the player presses the targeting button, it checks which of these targetable enemies is both in front of the character and closest to the center of the screen. This enemy is locked on, and the targeting camera is activated. You can control the targeting cam just like the regular character cam, but it ensures that both the character and the target are always visible. The camera target is basically the midpoint between the character and the enemy. You'll also notice the character always rotates to face the target, and strafe animations play for side or backward movements. These are just placeholders right now and will be replaced with better animations later. If there are multiple targetable enemies, players can switch targets whenever they want. The lock-on is only broken if the character moves too far away from the enemy, if the enemy dies, or if the player actively leaves targeting mode. Is there a targeting system from an existing game that you really liked? Drop it in the comments and share what you loved about it. Let's talk a bit about enemy behavior. We've already seen the simple cases where enemies get aggroed by the character, follow or attack them. What do I want to implement in the future? Enemies should definitely have more than one attack skill and use them based on the situation. Is the enemy low on health? Try to put some distance between them and the character and heal up. If the character is moving away for some reason, heal immediately. Conditions X and Y are met, use a powerful ultimate attack with a long cooldown. The player is about to shoot an arrow or throw a bomb at you, dodge with movement or use your teleport skill if you have one. I really want to create a versatile and cool combat system in VELKYN. Let me know in the comments if you have any cool ideas for enemy behavior. What's next in the development of the combat system? As you can see, the player currently doesn't get any feedback when dealing damage or taking damage. I'm planning to add sound effects, subtle screen and model color flashes, hit animations and particle effects to give the system more juice. Right now enemies can hear through walls like they're not even there. I plan to fix this. The pathfinding works, but I want enemies to be able to patrol. This will require a new system based on developer-defined paths. Enemies should have special abilities in addition to the normal melee and ranged attacks. I'm really looking forward to implementing this. Besides ground-based enemies, there will also be flying enemies. This will be interesting because these enemies should move on the nav mesh, but also be able to leave it and fly around when necessary. Once all of this is implemented and polished, I'm most excited to create boss fights. But that's gonna take a bit more time. And that wraps up the character controller video series. Future devlogs will be bigger and showcase progress across the whole game, so stay tuned. This final video in the series was a ton of work, so if you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. I want to keep delivering the best quality videos I can, and every like and subscribe fuels my motivation to keep going. Hey Bob.
Huh?
You were awesome.
Yay!